Hello everyone, back to NN Talented Goat. Let's see the only animal on the planet that has become extinct and has been revived. Let's start. First, let's go to the Pyrenees Mountains, where there are many things worth exploring and experiencing. On this mountain range, many species of animals and plants have existed for many centuries. Due to many factors, from natural impacts to human impacts, the number of many species has decreased. Among them, many species have only a few individuals left, especially the Pyrenean ibex goat, which officially became extinct in 2003. The Pyrenees is a mountain range located along the border between France and Spain, stretching nearly 310 miles from where it connects with the Cantabrian Mountains to Cap de Creus on the Mediterranean coast, with a maximum elevation of 11,168 feet at the summit of Aneto. For the most part, the main ridge forms the boundary between Spain and France, with the small country of Andorra situated in between. Historically, the Crown of Aragon and the Kingdom of Navarre extended across both sides of the range. The main climatic factors are the two adjoining bodies of water and the large continental areas to the north and south. The influence of the Atlantic Ocean reaches southward through the lower peaks of the Western Pyrenees, as far as Pamplona, Spain, moderating the climatic differences between the northern and southern slopes. This does not occur further east, particularly in the Central Pyrenees. The contrast in humidity between the French and Spanish sides is remarkable. To the north, the oceanic influence, unobstructed by the Aquitaine Plain in France, extends eastward beyond the north-south basins of the French rivers flowing into the Mediterranean. To the east, the Levanter wind, coming from the east and southeast, brings humid air from the Mediterranean, some of which falls as rain on the southeast slopes of the eastern branches. As a result, these areas are quite humid, while the northeastern Roussillon Plain in France has characteristics of a Mediterranean climate. To the south of the Central Pyrenees lies the Ebro Valley, which flows northwest to southeast and is blocked by the Catalonian Mountains running southwest to northeast near the eastern coast of Spain, acting like a small continent. Its climate, therefore, is one of the most extreme temperature contrasts, amplified by the general elevation of the Iberian Peninsula, but it is Mediterranean in nature, unlike anything found in other European countries. As a result, the climate of the Pyrenees varies widely, from the clear, sunny atmosphere of the continental zone to the mild fog of the northwest, encompassing all the transitional stages in between. The life forms in the Pyrenees have several remarkable features that cannot be explained solely by the climate and land. The historical ups and downs of the range and its isolation at the southwestern boundary of mainland Europe, far from the dispersing and transforming centers of various species, including humans, have shaped its population structure and characteristics. From northwest to southeast, the vegetation shows a clear oceanic influence, which gradually diminishes. The reverse is true for the Mediterranean influence from southeast to northwest. The exposure of the mountain surfaces and local climatic conditions, shaped by the mountain terrain, create specially enclosed areas that vary greatly in type. The most characteristic feature of the oceanic influence is the dominance of broadleaf deciduous trees in the forests at lower elevations and mid-altitude mountains, while the Mediterranean influence, manifested in evergreen broadleaf trees, not only dominates the hotter environments but also tolerates drier conditions.
The variety of vegetation according to altitude is evident in several layers. From mid-altitude mountains upwards, the broadleaf forests at about 5,200 feet are replaced by conifer species that require less water. The montane zone, which can be as low as 6,500 feet but is usually higher than 7,800 feet, gives way to sparse grasslands at higher altitudes. The variety of vegetation according to altitude is evident in several layers. From mid-altitude mountains upwards, the broadleaf forests at about 5,200 feet are replaced by conifer species that require less water. The montane zone, which can be as low as 6,500 feet but is usually higher than 7,800 feet, gives way to sparse grasslands at higher altitudes. This altitude pattern is evident in the vegetation around the eastern peaks of Ori and Eni. However, the oceanic influence with higher rainfall provides a different pattern for the western side of the range. Deciduous oaks can be found up to 5,850 feet, with some mixed coniferous species in the montane zone, where higher grasslands are better suited to withstand moisture and permanent snow. Overall, the landscape is similar to the high mountains of Western Europe. The Mediterranean influence spreads throughout the entire Ebro Valley, but it shows more distinct signs of a continental climate change in the central Pyrenees. There, a large number of mountain pines, which are more drought-tolerant, replace the deciduous trees in the higher, colder, and drier areas of the medium and high elevations on the southern slopes. Some groups of animals, such as cave dwellers, frogs, and toads, represent waves of migration from ancient Tyrrhenia, linked to Corsica and Sardinia, and have replaced some of the native European species, pushing them into the Cantabrian Mountains. Today, the fauna of the Pyrenees is rich in large herbivores as well as a diversity and abundance of carnivores. Some species, like wolves, lynxes, and brown bears, have disappeared or their numbers have significantly declined in the northern Pyrenees, although the prairie dog has been successfully reintroduced. However, the southern Pyrenees represents one of the last major wildlife refuges for species pushed out of more densely populated areas. The current distribution and differentiation of large warm-blooded species are certainly related to the climate and landscape, but the Central European origins of the Pyrenean fauna are clear. For example, among the two species of desman, an amphibious member of the mole family, one species lives in the Pyrenees, while the other is found in the southwestern part of Russia. Similar comments can be made about the origins of all cold-blooded species as well as the vegetation. There are fundamental differences among the species involved. The Pyrenean flora, originating from tropical regions, is distinct, with no competition from ancient European flora when the new range replaced the old Hercynian chain. The flora with Arctic origins, brought south during the relatively recent ice ages, is represented by two different branches of alpine plants, or plants adapted to life in the mountains, from Central Europe and Siberia. Other alpine species, long recognized, have Mediterranean origins and dominate the drier, sunnier regions of the southern slopes. An Atlantic plant group dominates the western Pyrenees. The Pyrenees mountain range stretches more than 400 kilometers between Navarre, Aragon, and Catalonia. Acting as a natural border between Spain and the rest of Europe, the range runs horizontally across the northern part of the country. The Atlas Mountains, with over 200 peaks higher than 3,000 meters, lush vegetation, numerous rivers, and many villages nestled at the foothills, provide countless ways to explore a unique way of life. In the Pyrenean Massif, one can visit one of two national parks, Aigues-Tortes i Estany de Saint-Maurici in Lleida, or Ordissa y Monte Perdido in Huesca, where species like the bearded vulture, partridges, and ibex can be seen. Additionally, due to the high peaks, it is an ideal location for mountaineering and hiking. Mountains such as the famous Aneto, Maladetta, and Pica di Estats offer some of the best panoramic views of the entire range. Next, let's continue with a video to learn more about how one of the residents of the Pyrenees mountain range became extinct. Pyrenean ibex/bucardo, scientific name, Capra pyrenaica pyrenaica. The Pyrenean ibex was the first animal to be resurrected after extinction. It was also the first animal on our planet to go extinct twice. In 2003, a Pyrenean ibex born as part of a resurrection project in Spain lived for only 10 minutes. Despite its short life, this small mammal represented a significant scientific breakthrough. The Pyrenean ibex, also known as bucardo or Pyrenean mountain goat, was once a common species in the tranquil Pyrenees Mountains along the French-Spanish border. Although native to the region, its large, twisted horns made it a target for hunters across Europe. In the second half of the 20th century, the most common sight of this species was as a mounted specimen on the walls of hunters, rather than roaming the hillsides. In January 2000, the Pyrenean ibex finally died, leading to its extinction. Other subspecies still exist, the western Spanish ibex, or Grito's ibex, and the southeastern Spanish ibex, or Bisite ibex, while the Portuguese ibex is extinct. Because the Pyrenean ibex went extinct before scientists could fully analyze them, the classification of this specific subspecies remains a subject of debate. After several unsuccessful attempts to revive the subspecies through cloning, a living specimen was born in July 2003. The cloned Pyrenean ibex was born in Spain through a genetic cloning technique, and the research paper was published in 2009. However, it died just a few minutes after birth due to lung defects. The Pyrenean ibex remains the only animal species to have been revived from extinction, and also the only species to have gone extinct twice. Many hypotheses have been proposed regarding the evolutionary process and historical migration of C. pyrenaica to the Iberian Peninsula, as well as the relationships between different subspecies. One possibility is that C. pyrenaica evolved from ancestors related to C. caucasica from the Middle East, during the early part of the last ice age. C. pyrenaica may have migrated from the northern Alps through southern France into the Pyrenees region during the early Magdalenian period, around 18,000 years ago. If this is the case, then C. caucasica pre-Pyrenaica might be more distinct from the other three ibex species found on the Iberian Peninsula than what scientists currently know.
There are several versions of when Pyrenaica or ibex first migrated and evolved on the Iberian Peninsula. Pyrenaica may have already been living on the Iberian Peninsula when ibex first started migrating across the Alps. Genetic evidence also supports the theory that multiple Capra subspecies migrated to the Iberian region at the same time. Hybridization is possible, but the results are inconclusive. The Pyrenean ibex had short fur that changed seasonally. In the summer, their fur was short, and in the winter, it grew longer and thicker. The fur on their necks remained long throughout the year. Male and female ibex can be distinguished by their color, fur, and horns. Male ibex were light gray-brown in the summer, with black markings on certain parts of their bodies, such as their mane, front legs, and forehead. In the winter, male ibex became less colorful. They shifted from light gray-brown to dull gray, and the black markings previously present became darker and faded. Female ibex, however, could be mistaken for deer, as their coats were brown throughout the summer. Unlike males, females did not have black markings. Young ibex had the same color as females during their first year of life. Male ibex had large, thick horns that curved outward and backward, then curled outward and downward before curving inward and upward. The surface of the horns had ridges, which developed progressively with age. It is said that each ridge represents a year of life, so the total number of ridges corresponds to the age of the ibex. Female ibex had shorter, cylindrical horns. The Pyrenean ibex ate plants such as grasses and herbs. The Pyrenean ibex migrated seasonally. In the spring, they would migrate to higher mountain areas, where males and females would mate. During this time, the females often separated from the males to give birth in more remote areas. Kids were usually born in May, typically as a single offspring. In the winter, the ibex migrated to valleys without snow. These valleys allowed them to forage regardless of seasonal changes. This species was commonly found in some regions of France, Portugal, Spain, and Andorra, but not much in the northern areas of the Iberian Peninsula. In areas like Andorra and mainland France, the Pyrenean ibex went extinct first in the northern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. It is estimated that the Pyrenean ibex once had a peak population of 50,000 individuals, spread across more than 50 subgroups, ranging from the Sierra Nevada to Sierra Morena and Muela de Cortez. Many of these subgroups lived in the hilly terrain extending into Spain and Portugal. The last remaining Pyrenean ibex were found in the central and eastern Pyrenees, at altitudes below 3,940 feet. However, in the southern regions of France and neighboring areas, ibex were found at altitudes ranging from 1,150 to 3,030 feet up to 3,900 to 7,350 feet. The Pyrenean ibex was abundant until the 14th century, and their numbers did not begin to decline in the region until the mid-19th century. The Pyrenean ibex tended to live in rocky habitats with cliffs and trees interspersed with shrubs or pine forests. However, small rocky patches in agricultural land or various areas along the Iberian coastline also formed suitable habitats. The Pyrenean ibex could thrive in their environment as long as the habitat was suitable, and they were able to disperse and expand rapidly. This subspecies once ranged across the Pyrenees in France and Spain, and the surrounding areas, including the Basque Country, Navarre, northern Aragon, and northern Catalonia. Several hundred years ago, they were abundant, but by 1900, their numbers had dwindled to fewer than 100. From 1910 onward, their population never rose above 40, and this subspecies was only found in a small part of the Ordesa National Park in Huesca. The Pyrenean ibex was one of the 4 subspecies of the Iberian ibex. The first to go extinct was the Portuguese ibex, Capra pyrenaica lusitanica, in 1892. The Pyrenean ibex was the second, with the last individual, a female named Celia, found dead in 2000. During the medieval period, the Pyrenean ibex was very common in the Pyrenees region but rapidly declined in the 19th and 20th centuries due to hunting pressure. By the second half of the 20th century, only a small population survived in Ordesa National Park in the central Pyrenees of Spain. Competition with both wild and domesticated hoofed animals also contributed to the extinction of the Pyrenean ibex. Most of its range was shared with sheep, domestic goats, cattle, and horses, especially in the summer when they grazed on high mountain pastures. This led to competition between species and overgrazing, particularly affecting the Pyrenean ibex during drought years. In addition, the introduction of non-native wild ungulate species into the areas where the ibex lived, e.g. wild deer and mouflon sheep in the Sierras de Cazorla, Segura y Las Villas Natural Park, increased grazing pressure and the risk of disease transmission. The last natural Pyrenean ibex, a female named Celia, was found dead on January 6, 2000, it had been killed by a fallen tree. The exact reasons for the decline and extinction of this subspecies are not fully understood. Some hypotheses include an inability to compete with other species for food, disease and infection, and poaching. The Pyrenean ibex formed a useful resource for humans, which could have been a factor in their eventual extinction. Researchers believe that the final decline of the Pyrenean ibex may have been due to continuous hunting pressure and possibly because the species could not compete with other livestock species in the area. However, the exact cause of the extinction of this animal remains unclear. The Pyrenean ibex became the first species to become immortal on July 30, 2003, when a female ibex was cloned and born alive, surviving for a few minutes before dying from lung defects. Celia, the last Pyrenean ibex, was captured in the Ordesa y Monte Perdido National Park in Huesca, Spain. Skin biopsy samples were taken and frozen in nitrogen. By whom? She died a year after tissue was taken from her ear. The American biotechnology company, Advanced Cell Technology Incorporated, announced in 2000 that the Spanish government would allow them to attempt to clone her using those samples. ACT planned to collaborate with other scientists to clone Celia by transferring her nucleus. It was expected that this would be easier than cloning the endangered species of wild cattle, Las Gallas, since the reproductive biology of goats is better understood and their normal gestation period is only 5 months. Additionally, only a few extinct species are candidates for cloning because a suitable surrogate host is required to carry the clone to full term. ACT had agreed with the Aragon government that any cloned Pyrenean ibex would be returned to its original habitat. Celia provided the tissue samples necessary for the cloning process. However, the cloning attempts highlighted a major issue. Even if a healthy Pyrenean ibex could be cloned, there were no males to reproduce with the female clone. To create a viable population of a previously extinct species, genetic material from multiple individuals is needed to ensure genetic diversity within the cloned population. This is a significant obstacle to the re-establishment of an extinct species via cloning. One solution could be to breed clones of Celia with males from another subspecies, although the hybrids would not be purebred Pyrenean ibex. A more ambitious plan was to remove an X chromosome and add a Y chromosome from a still existing subspecies, creating a male Pyrenean ibex, but such technology does not yet exist, and it is uncertain whether this could be achieved without causing irreversible damage to the cells. 3 teams of scientists, 2 Spanish and 1 French, were involved in the cloning project. One of the Spanish teams was led by Dr. José Folch from Zaragoza, from the Aragon Food Technology and Research Center. The other teams included researchers from the National Institute for Agricultural and Food Research in Madrid. The project was coordinated by the Food and Agricultural Research Agency of the Aragon government, Servicio de Investigación Agroalimentaria del Gobierno de Aragón, and the National Institute for Agricultural and Food Research and Technology, Instituto Nacional de Investigación y Tecnología Agraria y Alimentaria. The French National Institute for Agricultural Research, INRA, was also involved in the project. The researchers took mature somatic cells from tissue and fused them with egg cells from goats whose nuclei had been removed. The purpose of removing the nucleus from the goat's egg cell was to extract the complete DNA of the ibex, so no genetic contribution from the egg donor would be made to the clone. The resulting embryos were then transferred into a domestic goat, Capra hircus, to serve as the surrogate mother. The first cloning attempts failed. Of the 285 embryos created, 54 embryos were transferred to 12 hybrids between ibex and domestic goats, but only 2 embryos survived the first 2 months of pregnancy before dying. On July 30, 2003, a clone was born alive, but it died a few minutes later due to physical defects in the lungs. The clone had collapsed lungs and an additional lobe in the left lung. Despite this setback, the cloned cells of Celia, taken by the research team, are still being studied in an attempt to create hybrid offspring. The cells of this creature remain alive and frozen, providing an advantage over the potential resurrection of extinct species like the woolly mammoth, which have much older DNA. However, reproductive biotechnology still has a long way to go before communities can be cloned or brought back to life. This was the first attempt to resurrect an extinct subspecies, although technically, the process began before the subspecies actually went extinct. As soon as I held the animal in my hands, I knew it was suffering from respiratory failure. We had prepared oxygen and special medications, but it could not breathe normally. In 7 or 10 minutes, it died, Alberto said. So another poor animal is officially extinct. No matter how hard we try, we cannot resist the laws of nature. We hope that many animals will live peacefully and forever on our planet. Thank you everyone for watching the video. We hope you like, share and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying NN Talented Goat. See you again.